Hello, nerds for humanity. I have Katherine Gehl back in the nerd zone. She's going to talk about how things are going with her efforts to advocate for Final Five instant runoff voting with some RCV in there as well. And we're also going to talk about zero-based rulemaking and what that means and how it might be helpful to the country. So welcome back to the show, Katherine. How are you doing?
Tom, I'm great. And this was one of my favorite podcasts. And so I'm so happy to be back. It's great to see you again. And again, I'm just a fan. So hi to your listeners and viewers.
I appreciate it. I still have, I think your team sent me a coffee mug that that was signed by you. And I the Institute coffee mug. I use it on a regular basis.
Okay, so then I'll just tease that I will send you now our new
I don't have
mug.
one of those.
This one, Final Five voting. We decided that we weren't really selling the Institute for Political Innovation, so we might as well make the mugs with the thing we wanted people to buy. Which is, where the Institute is trying to have people love Final Five voting. And then maybe after today, I'm going to have to make some mugs that say, zero-based legislative rulemaking. But I don't know.
That sounds like a true Nerds for Humanity type messaging.
Yes, and you'll need some readers to see it.
Yeah. Well, you guys should make some, if you don't already, laptop decals are always great to stick on the back of the laptop,
I should totally do that.
Yeah, because it'll be a conversation starter like, what's zero-based rulemaking,
Laptop decals.
Yeah.
All done. You know what I really want it to be on? The things, those little pockets that you put your
credit card
in. But now this is my nerdy thing. I have one built in. Is yours built in?
Yeah.
There, see, we must both be nerds.
We have to have it. I'm not carrying a wallet.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Also, that it just makes me look old. So
tell me what's going on with, I feel like when you were on the show, I guess a couple years ago, the topic of voting reform was still a little bit kind of, early stage. And I don't know if it's mainstream yet, but people are talking about it more than they used to. And so first of all, congrats on being part of the chorus of people raising awareness. How are things going from your perspective?
Oh, things are going great. But that's because they're going great for this time where we're at. If we're only this far in a year, I won't call that great, meaning the bar has to keep moving, which is to say we have to keep making progress. So relative to where we were when I was first on your podcast, when probably many of the listeners had never heard of anything I was talking about, except maybe your listeners, because you were already talking about the ranked choice voting part of it. I mean, nobody had heard of it. And so then I was just happy as people started even liking what we were doing. But since I've been on your podcast, we passed what I propose, which is this combination of two reforms that collectively are called Final Five voting, and also an earlier version called Final Four voting. We've passed that in Alaska in 2020. So Alaska statewide elections and state legislative elections and Alaska elections for their federal delegation all occurred in 2022 under the new system that I was promoting when we first met. And then we passed it by ballot initiative in Nevada in 2022. And there it won by 7 points, which was larger than the margin of any of their marquee candidate races like governor or senator. And we are on track. And by we, I mean this sort of writ large, those of us working now on Final Four and Final Five voting, we're on track to be on the ballot in 4 states with, a chance for those citizens of those states to say yes. One of those is indeed Nevada, because Nevada's constitution requires that you pass the initiative twice. So we always needed to pass it again. But point being, we've got 4 states, and if they all vote yes, and Alaska survives a repeal that was started by Sarah Palin against this system when she didn't win under it, if that happens, we'll have 5 states with totally different incentives for their elections. And if I could, maybe I should, for your viewers, step back just for a moment to summarize the goal of the work that I do, and therefore the goal of Final Five voting, and then what we were going to talk about more today, which is this rule-based, this zero-based rulemaking. Would that be cool?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so I am really a business person. I sold my company in 2015 so I could devote myself full time to what I call political innovation. And the idea is to rethink how our political system works. I wrote this book, it's back there, and it's called The Politics Industry. And the core idea of that is to look at politics the way I had become used to in my business career, at looking at any, commercial industry. Like I was in the food industry, and you can look at, I used basically the gold standard tools that have been used for decades to analyze competition in a commercial industry, and then applied them to the politics industry. And essentially it was some version of, wow, this is a duopoly. And it's a duopoly where, almost all the customers are unhappy. Let's say 90% of them are unhappy. And there's only, as in any duopoly, 2 competitors. And yet there's never any new entrants, even though there's tons of value, as in tons of revenue and power and everything. There's a lot of value in this industry that's being shared between the 2 halves of the political industrial complex. So if 90% of the customers are unhappy and there's only 2 competitors, in any other industry, some entrepreneur would see it as a phenomenal business opportunity, and they would come into the marketplace and they would give the customers what they want. And the customers would benefit, in this case, the voters, because either the new entrant would force one of the existing duopolists to adjust their behavior and, bring that innovation to the customers, or they would be overtaken by the new entrant. But no matter what happens, the new entrant, the new innovation, the competition would end up delivering value to the customers. But that never happens in politics, because it turns out that the 2 halves of the political industrial complex work very well together in one particular way. And that is to rig the rules of the game behind the scenes to protect themselves jointly from new competition. And ever so conveniently, antitrust rules, which the politicians have made and apply to all the other industries, don't apply to politics. So what I moved forward from that thesis was this idea that competition is dysfunctional, and that in any human endeavor, competition is the key driver of innovation, results, and accountability. So if you don't have open competition, if you have these high barriers to entry where you're always going to have 2 parties regardless, well, you're going to have these 2 parties regardless of what they do or don't get done, that we didn't have any hope of getting better results. That it wasn't about having a change candidate. It was about not being able to have, new competition. So I designed, I created this theory, that sort of called politics industry theory. And the idea is that that in the politics industry, we have 2 kinds of competition going on. One competition is when the candidates and the parties are competing to win elections. And then out of that, I designed a change, which I'll talk about in a moment, to change how elections are run. And then the second competition, which I don't even think I've done any podcast about until today, is that after people are elected and they're in the legislature, The political industrial complex and their legislators also compete again. Then there is a competition to pass laws, to pass policy, and to use the oversight powers of Congress. And that competition is also massively dysfunctional, and it is also completely distorted by behind the scenes machinations of the political industrial complex to make those rules for themselves. So let me give you an example quickly on the rules of the game. Okay, here's a constitution, right? Tiny.
Mm-hmm.
In here, there are six paragraphs on how the House and the Senate should operate.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I have an exhibit for you.
Oh boy, here it comes.
This is the House Rules book.
Mm.
And this is the Senate Rules book. And so I will show you the whole thing. Yep, this is the rules books.
Mm-hmm.
Our problem isn't in here. It's in here. And this is only the written down rules, okay? I never read all of these. I mean, I never read any of them. But what I can tell you is not in here is best practices of problem solving. What's in here is rules on how to divide up the spoils of power. And that is happening really well. But as you might imagine, when you're dividing up the spoils of power, that likely has nothing to do with making it likely that legislators will be working on our behalf to solve the problems. So, and then I'll turn it back to you in a moment. Mm-hmm. So here we are today, knowing that we need to change the rules of how people are elected so that there's free and fair competition. And that's what Final Five voting does, which I'm happy to talk a little more about if you want. And then we also need to change the rules of how legislation is made, because in all cases, the rules of the game affect the way the game is played and they affect the outcome of the game. And the rules of the game in elections create the wrong incentives, and the rules of the game in legislating create the wrong incentives. The goal is to do these in a little bit different time frame, which is you could have the perfect rules for Congress, but one of the rules that's in this Constitution is that Congress makes their own rules. Mm-hmm. So you could have the perfect rules, but unless they voted to use the perfect rules, it would just be a theoretical exercise. So the idea is, let's change the rules of elections so that people are incented to solve problems on behalf of the broad public interest. And then they are the people who will want the rules of the legislature to actually make it more likely that they can solve the problems that they're now accountable to their voters for.
Love it. Well, let's take those two in order. Let's get a recap of the Final Five kind of efforts and the vision for that, because I have heard actually we had you on when there was that panel discussion and there was like debate between approval and star and RCV, like and even before we went online, you were reiterating some of the nuances on what you're advocating for. Maybe for the benefit of the audience, what is you're not just RCV. You're intentionally saying Final Five for a reason. Can you maybe explain a little bit more for people to understand the differences?
So I actually, if I had my way, I would try not to say that this is a voting reform. I would talk about this as being an election innovation, which is to say we're not trying to tinker around the edges here. But if we want to think about this in the scheme of reform, here's how I would differentiate it. mostly political reform or election reform or voting reform, democracy reform, has been concerned with making things more fair, more representative, more democratic.
Mm-hmm.
I'm for all those things, good things. But there are certain reforms that are out there that if you implemented them, you can make an argument, which, by the way, you'll never get everybody to agree with, but that your new way is more fair. And you can make that argument, for example, with ranked choice voting. You can make that argument with proportional representation. But let's even say you got everybody to agree with you that that was more fair. Those things are not necessarily in any way connected to whether the people elected in that system would get results that the people that elect them want, which is to say that they would solve the problems and create the opportunities that they should be doing in Congress. So I talk about it as, yeah, it'll be more fair. It's kind of like you're on the Titanic and you're arguing over, the shape or the color of the lifeboats, and like
Mm-hmm.
you'll be more fair while you're still drowning. And that
Mm-hmm.
I didn't get that analogy quite right. But the point is that what I am concerned about and what my work concerns itself with is essentially a different question, which is to say, what should the rules of the elections be in order to make it most likely that the people elected will do their work in a way that solves problems that make the broad that in the broad public interest. So for that, what we need to concern ourselves with is who hires and whether they have real choices, which is to say right now, this encapsulates the two problems. Right now, over 85% of Congress is hired in low turnout summer party primaries.
Mm-hmm.
So in 2022, 83% of Congress was hired by 8% of the voting public. That's it. So that's who the hiring bosses are, and that's who they work for. And that means that most November general election votes are irrelevant because whoever won the Republican primary in the red district is guaranteed to win in November, and whoever won the Democratic primary in the blue district is guaranteed to win in November. And so the only people that our representatives report to are these 8% of voters who are here and who are here. And these are the 8% of voters who, while we might think they could not be more different, they're actually the same in one particular way, which is they're characterized by negative partisanship, and they would rather, it sort of means they hate the other side more than they have any particular allegiance to their side's policy. So the one thing they don't want is these sides to work together to solve problems.
Mm.
And they're less likely, so people elected in this way are likely to lose their jobs if they do their jobs. So if we think their job is to solve problems, let's say to reach a bipartisan sustainable deal on the debt and deficit, both sides, if they vote yes on that, will be fired. So we all in our jobs do what it takes to get and keep them.
Mm-hmm.
And if if on the day of our orientation, our bosses said to us, oh yeah, by the way, I just got to let you know that if you do your job really well, in 2 years, we're going to fire you. We would change that in our companies because it wouldn't work very well for us. But that's what our election system tells our existing representatives. So the second problem is that there's never any new competition, so there's no accountability. And that's what I had covered a bit earlier. So what Final Five voting does is solve for these two problems. First, we change who hires. Nobody should ever be hired, which is to say nobody should ever win until November voters turn out.
Mm.
Never. Nobody should win in the summer, ever. Every election should be competitive in November. And the second thing is that when it's competitive, it has to be, you actually have to have choices. It can't just be that, there's one Democrat and one Republican, you have to have lots of different competitors. So if the district is Republican and a Republican is definitely going to win, I don't consider it competitive, to have a Democrat there. You have to have multiple Republicans to choose from, because maybe one Republican is all talk and then the other Republican can say, or the other conservative can say, hey, you just talked about these things, but you cut all of these deals and I, will actually get this done. You need real competition. So Final Five voting does two things. We get rid of party primaries. Instead, you have one primary and all the candidates run on the same ballot, regardless of party, although they do have a party affiliation. And all voters have the right to participate, regardless of party. When the polls close in the primary, the top 5 finishers, or in another version, the top 4 finishers, like Alaska has Final Four, the top 4 or top 5 finishers go to the general election. And then in the general election, we, of course, don't want one of those 5 competitors to win with 21% of the vote, which could happen if the vote split relatively equally 5 ways. So then we use the tool of instant runoffs. And that is what most of your listeners will think of as being ranked choice voting. I really prefer to always call it instant runoff, because it helps those people who aren't familiar with it basically understand what it is, because people know what a runoff is and it's just instant. And we do it with instant runoffs enabled by a ranked ballot. I explained that it's exactly like a series of physical runoffs, but instead of having to keep coming back for another election to the polls, you just cast all your votes at once using that ranked ballot. So now we've done 2 things. We've made sure no one wins until November, so they're accountable to all those, to November voters. And by using instant runoffs, they're accountable to a majority of them. And there's real competition to solve problems, so they know they just can't have their safe seat. They've actually got to have things done, or one of those 5 competitors at least is going to make a case to replace them in the next election. And that's Final Five voting. And as I said, we've got Final Four voting in Alaska, Final Five passed in Nevada, and this fall we're on track to have FFV, which works for Final Four and Final Five, FFV on the ballot in Colorado, Nevada, Montana, Idaho, and also defending a repeal in Alaska. That's the voting.
So just to clarify, are we saying if we don't have the summer primaries, is it just one day in November that it all happens, or are there still 2 moments that people are casting?
Very good point. There are still 2 separate elections. There is a primary.
Right.
It is not a party primary that determines the nominee of the Democratic Party or the Republican primary. It is a preliminary round primary that narrows the field to the top 5 candidates who qualify for the November general election.
Okay.
And then between the primary and the general election, you know who's competing. They are all potentially have an impact on the race, and you can focus on, those 5, and then you only have to rank 5, and you can actually rank as few as 1 if you want. But those 5 go to the general election, and then you can easily have, if it's a Republican district, 3 Republicans, 1 Democrat, 1 independent. You could have 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans, a Green Party, any combination of parties, independents, or numbers of people from the same party would work. So let's see if we can take an example. If you go to now different people would run, and even people who are the same people, they would run differently if the rules were different, because that's what the change of rules does. So you don't totally want to apply it retroactively, but if you go back to the Pennsylvania Senate race of 2022, there were Mehmet Oz beat the Republican Dave McCormick in the Republican primary. So under Final Five voting, they would have both gone to the general election. And then John Fetterman beat Connor Lamb in the Democratic primary. So they would have both gone. And then there would have been a 5th candidate, maybe an independent, we don't know exactly, right, in that general election. And it's actually possible, and certainly according to Mitch McConnell, it is likely that, and I'm referring here to when he said they had a candidate quality problem.
Mm-hmm.
He was saying that the people that were coming out of the primaries were not the best suited to win a general.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes, Democrats believe they have that candidate quality problem. Point being, we're not going to let 8% of the public determine which candidate should be the winner. We'll let a majority of the general election pick the candidate with the quality they want. And they'll have 5 choices now. They won't just have lesser of 2 evils elections anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Those just won't exist anymore.
And when you're talking about these states that are considering these reforms, what is the timing between the one primary and then election day? Like, how is it a month? Is it 3 months or?
So interestingly, in the Constitution, it says in Article 1 that all the states make the rules for the federal elections. And of course, they make the rules for their own elections. So that's why every state has all these different rules.
Mm-hmm.
So in this system, it will be whatever the state decides. In most cases, I suspect that states will keep whatever their existing primary date is.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, the general election will all be November 5th. Oh, well, sorry, will be the first Tuesday in November, which this year is November 5th. But they'll keep their own primary date.
Got it. Very cool. Yeah, I mean, we have a little taste of that in California where, like in my district, we have the top 2, and it's much more interesting with that because we have 2 Democrats going at each other now for our district. And I'm glad, because if it were, it's such a blue district that if there were a Republican nominee, it would be pointless. Like there's no competition.
And what it would have meant if there were a Republican nominee and only one of those Democrats had advanced, you might as well sleep through on November 5th relative to that race.
Yeah.
Which is I'm always constantly talking to reformers. I'm like, I don't really get along with all reformers all that well. I'm like, why all this hullabaloo about the right to vote when nobody talks ever about the right for your vote to matter?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because in over 85% of cases for the U.S. House of Representatives, November elections are a farce in our democracy.
Mm-hmm.
People are completely wasting their time. So sometimes we run get out the vote campaigns to convince people to do the thing that makes no difference.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the right to vote is super important, but imagine how much more amazing it would be if when you exercised your right to vote, that vote made a difference in who wins. And imagine even more than that if your vote made a difference in what those winners do when they're doing the jobs. And that's my point about the difference between Final 5 voting and, let's say, ranked choice voting on its own.
Mm-hmm.
You can put ranked choice voting in like Maine did. And by the way, I supported that at the time. I hadn't yet realized how insufficient it was. But basically, the election, if it's an uncompetitive district, the election is still decided every time in the primary.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
You see? So, and you still only have 1 Democrat, 1 Republican. And then you can rank the Democrat, the Republican, and the couple people that you've never heard of until you got to the ballot. And you're like, oh, who are these additional people here? Like the Libertarian that got on, or the Independent that got on through signatures. There's always a few more people running that are on the ballot, but you really haven't heard of them until you get there. That's not really competition. And in a red district, the decision will be made in the summer, and in a blue district, the decision will be made in the summer. So if you don't change who hires, they're still working for a tiny portion of the country or of their state or their district. And therefore, those are the only people they can afford to care about. So we have to change who hires them. And the only thing that does that is getting 4 or 5 competitors in November who are legit competitors. It doesn't help to have miscellaneous competitors. You have to have, real competition there. And by the way, the whole point of this is to change what they do, because now let's look at how it changes what they do. In Congress right now, if I'll use the debt deficit example again, if there has been a negotiated solution like Simpson-Bowles came up with, about 10, was that 2013? Anyway, however many years ago it was, during the Obama administration, this bipartisan commission, Simpson-Bowles, comes up with a plan where nobody got everything they wanted, but there was revenue increase and there was benefit decrease. That plan was abandoned by everybody because when the legislators are looking at it, they say they can't afford to ask themselves, is this a good plan? Is this the best plan that's possible, given that we have to agree with other people? Is this what the majority of the people in my district would like? They can't ask themselves any of those questions, because the only question they can afford to ask themselves is, will I make it through my next party primary if I vote for this? And if the answer to that is no, which it basically always is on both sides on any compromise, because any compromise, your side isn't getting everything they want, then you say, the rational incentive to get reelected dictates that you vote no. Now, fast forward, or sort of wipe the slate clean and now put final 5 voting situation in, same district, same legislator who has the same policy beliefs, same Simpson-Bowles legislation, potentially super different outcome. Because now that legislator looks at it and says, I'm not for sure going to lose if I vote for this. I know that I'll be in the top 5. I will get to make my case to the general electorate. And, then when I get to the general electorate, where it's not as partisan and where all the people who don't participate in the primary, as well as people from the other party, as well as independents, participate, perhaps I can craft a win with this kind of negotiation and deal making and problem solving. So currently, that kind of a deal guarantees you can't win. Under final 5 voting, that sort of deal making doesn't guarantee you will win. It just ends the guarantee that you won't.
Got it. Let me ask you a related question, Katherine, about this, and then we should talk about the zero-based rulemaking.
We're not getting there. Okay.
But one thing that it seems to me this premise relies upon is that the voters in November are not going to go to their respective party corners and just kind of vote against the other party's representative. That we are assuming that the voting population is going to make a nuanced decision, and they are going to be open-minded about, the person who would have otherwise been second place in the party primary, but actually they're pretty kind of mainstream and tends to be a little bit more centrist. I wonder, given the state of polarization and media, if that is necessarily true, though. I worry that a lot of people really are putting on their jerseys even in November.
Well, they're totally putting on their jerseys. Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with that. And everybody who voted for someone in the primary is going to still vote for that person as their top choice in the general. But now, instead of having 8% of voters turning out, you're having over 60% of voters turn out. And everybody's vote matters, not just the people who vote in the primary that district is tilted towards. So Republicans also have a say in Democratic districts. Democrats have a say in Republican districts because you have to get a majority. Okay, so if those 8% of voters put their party hats on and vote for the partisan candidate they would have voted for in the primary, that candidate is going to have 8% of the first choice votes. That's a long way from 50. So you're still going to have to get to over 50. And by the way, I actually am not, this is actually such a long conversation. I'm not sure we're going to get to zero-based rulemaking. I'm not proposing this system, and a lot of reformers talk about it, and I think they misunderstand it. This is not a system to elect moderates. This is not a system designed to prioritize centrist. Innovation, and now I'm talking about policy innovation or innovation in human endeavor, it doesn't ever arise from the squishy middle. Okay? Innovation arises from what are at the time's fringes. And there can be good innovation, bad innovation, etc. But I don't want an election system that is guaranteed to elect someone that is at the exact median of public opinion at the time on every single issue. What we need are people with lots of different ideas who take those ideas to Congress. And if they're elected in a district that is, quote, extreme, they will be extreme. If the district is extreme by whatever measure someone wants to say, defines extreme, then when they get to Congress, they fight for their ideas, but they can now agree to vote yes on a moderate thing, on a moderate deal, on a collaborative program, on a consensus bill. So we're not trying to get everybody showing up there agreeing. We're trying to get people who know that if they argue for what they want, like someone who thinks that the debt should be reduced only by raising taxes, and someone else thinks the debt should be reduced only by cutting government programs, have at it, because those are trade-offs. And then under Final Five voting, you can say, it's not everything I wanted or what I think everything my district wanted, but I can vote yes on the solution, and my district will be better off with this solution than with the nothing that we currently get on debt deficit reduction, where now we just increase programs and increase taxes, or increase the debt by reducing taxes while increasing programs or keeping programs the same. So here's a way of looking at it. If the fairy godmother came down right now and said, Tom is a genius, and you have two choices. You can let Tom, the genius, pick all the perfect people for the 535 members of the House and the Senate, and they're perfect. But don't do anything with the rules of their next reelection. Or B, keep all the existing people in Congress, but change the rules of their next election to Final Five voting so that they're accountable to a majority of the general electorate, a majority of November voters, and that they will have 4 people competing against them in the November general electorate. Which would you choose? I'm sorry, you are a genius, but I would choose B in a heartbeat.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. I know
so it doesn't matter so much who they elect. That's what I'm saying. We have to stop thinking that there's some election system that if you elect the perfect people, good things will happen. It is that if you elect people under incentives for them to solve problems that matter to general election voters, then that's what they'll do.
Yeah, I hear you on that. I am still a little bit concerned around the general election voters doing their homework and voting for their interests.
That is a problem with democracy. That voters get to choose.
That is a limitation. Yes.
Yeah. So if like I hope you see what I'm getting at.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm not going for it's the worst system. It's the least bad system we have. I get that. I have had the
But I mean,
uh,
literally, like, what would you choose otherwise? To leave it with the 8%
no, I
of
wouldn't, but I
voters?
would. I think I would actually invest. It's not a either or, but maybe it's an and in education and civics and learning. Like as an example, I had the opportunity to live in Switzerland for 4 years,
Mm.
and they take their elections really seriously. And they will read binders of primers. Like regular people are reading these things, and they know what their budget is. They know how much they're spending on defense. Most Americans don't. Um, and you could argue, well, it's a small country. I get it. But there's also a culture of direct democracy and participation there.
Mhm.
And it's less about, oh, your guy sucks. Ha ha ha. And it's more around like, well, let's solve problems. And I think Final Five is a step in the right direction. I do think it also requires voters to, treat this every November as a sacred moment and put as much time in to your vote as you would buying a car. But I don't know if we do that today. I mean,
Well,
people watching this
if we
show, they
just
do.
said that factually for 85% of voters, it's worth 0
Mhm.
of their time because the decision was made, why should they put any time into it? Final Five voting actually makes it worth putting time into. So the first thing we have to do is not get voters to put time into a thing that doesn't matter. We have to have a thing that matters, an election where their vote matters. And then all on their own, some voters will decide that since it now is worth doing, and since it's no longer a lesser of two evils elections, and that they actually see one of those 5 candidates, and everybody's way more likely to see someone they actually like versus lesser of two evils choice, that they'll put time into it. Then we change the voters' incentives as well. Although for sure, I'm totally support, civics and other things that we can do. But it's just if you don't make the vote matter, you can't encourage people to spend time learning about the candidates because it's a waste of their time.
Yeah, I think we're an and on this one,
Yeah,
Catherine. I
we're
think
an
we're in
and.
agreement.
Yeah.
I have a question in the live chat from Lou, who's saying, "Hey, where are we? When are we going to talk about zero-based rulemaking?" So let's get into that.
Okay, so after they're elected, then they're in Congress, and as I noted, the Constitution says that Congress makes the rules of the game, and I showed you the Constitution with the
Mhm.
6 things, and then the big pile of rules. And there's also just a whole set of norms and practices that aren't even written down um, about how Congress works, and these are mostly invisible to people. And we never really think about them. And yet we want to uncover them and start to realize how crazy they are. So let's give an example. Okay, go back to the 2013 government shutdown. Pretty sure it's 2013. It is perhaps, it's mostly not known that shutdown could have been entirely averted or ended at any point in time if then Speaker of the House, John Boehner, had allowed the House of Representatives to vote on a bill that was already passed by the Senate and that Barack Obama, the president, was ready to sign. But Speaker Boehner was using what's called the Hester rule. Again, it's not written down, but it's a practice of the House. And what that said, or what that norm is that the Speaker will not allow a vote on any bill unless that bill is supported by a majority of the majority, meaning a majority of the
Mhm.
Speaker's party. And today, well, I'll tell you about today later. So at that time, that bill was not supported by a majority of the Republicans, even if there were enough votes in the entire House to pass it. So what the Hastert rule means is that even if there are enough votes in the entire House to pass it, let's say a majority, in that case, a minority of the Republicans and a majority of the Democrats, it will never pass because there will never even be a vote in the House of Representatives, because one person elected in a party primary in one district, and I got to get the exact number of people, I mean, it's going to be in the tens of thousands that elected him, gets to decide that we shall not ever, ever, ever vote on that. And in the case of the 2013 government shutdown, that rule was determinative because the shutdown ended only when Boehner broke with his party and broke the Hastert rule to allow the vote, which meant that that rule cost this country, it's over 20 billion. It's been a while since I've told that story. $1 billion in a shutdown that lasted for 16 days, which a majority of the United States voters never wanted in the first place. And yet, if you go back and look at that time, there's no op-eds or editorials that say, let Congress vote. Like, how is it possible that they aren't even voting and that one person gets to say, no, you can't vote, when there were the votes? There were always the votes. And what I was amazed about at the time is, how come no one thinks this is crazy? That this one guy, and Nancy Pelosi when she's in charge, and Speaker McCarthy when he's in charge, and if whoever we have next, they decide. So we actually have, I mean, in some ways they have every bit as much power as the president, and in some ways it's sort of more because it's so behind the scenes. Like, we don't realize that they don't have to let anything be voted on. And that's a crazy way to run a democracy. So we need to change these rules of the game so that these chambers are not run in a way that simply prioritizes majority party power, but that actually makes it likely that the legislators will engage in problem-solving behavior. So there are other norms and practices, like that both parties have separate cloakrooms, both parties speak from separate podiums, both parties sit in separate sides. It doesn't have to be that way in any way, shape, or form. So what zero-based rulemaking says is we take our cue from zero-based budgeting, which was started back in the 1970s, and the idea of zero-based budgeting, which a lot of organizations use, is when we make our budget, we don't start with a historical budget and then go up and down from there. We just start with future anticipated value. So nothing has any dollars allocated to it until we prove that those dollars are needed. And so here we would say, let's get rid of all those papers of rules. Let's get rid of, I'm going to read you these things. Let's get rid of the rules of the House of Representatives, the standing rules of the Senate, the authority and rules of Senate committees, the rules adopted by the committees of the House of Representatives, and the rules of the Committee on Rules. So let's just get rid of all of those. And then let's have a nonpartisan commission where we take advantage of everything that we've learned since we created this Congress. Everything we've learned in behavioral science, conflict resolution, negotiations, technology, organizational management, neuroscience, the best practices of how groups can work together to solve problems. And this legislative commission would have one sort of guideline, which is to say, okay, you guys are tasked with this. You have a two-chamber legislative body. There's 100 people, in the Senate, 2 from each state. There's 435 people in the Congress, and these are elected every 2 years. These are elected every 6. The Congress has a speaker, and the House has a speaker. Done. Now, starting from scratch, if you wanted those 435 people to solve the kinds of problems that the federal government is in charge of, like the federal budget, like the war powers, immigration, healthcare, education, any sort of a problem like that where there are complex problems, there are trade-offs, what would you have them do? What might be a way that you would want them to be able to work together? And I doubt it would be this, which is like, okay, everybody, we have immense power and we're running the most powerful country on earth. I have a great idea. Let's come together and solve these problems. But quickly, before we get started, let's count off by twos and divide into warring teams, and then we'll get right to work. I mean, you wouldn't do that in your organization. But that's how the legislative rules work today. And we think that's totally normal, and it's totally optional. Now, again, I believe in strong parties and people having ideas where they violently disagree because there's a lot of trade-offs on issues. But there is a way to bring people together that makes it most likely that they will be able to work through those trade-offs and come up with the solution. And then there's a way that makes it most likely that they never will. Right now, the electoral incentives say that if you come together, you'll lose. So we'd get rid of that one with final five voting. But then here, the way you have power is by cleaning up for your side of the team, not by solving the problems. And that's one of the reasons also we keep centralizing power into the speaker's role. One of the things these rules, when they were reworked from a zero base, would likely do is have members themselves have an actual good deal of power as well as responsibility. So this legislative commission would, come up with this, and then it would be proposed to Congress, and then Congress still constitutionally has to decide what rules they want to adopt. But the idea is this could take 3 to 5 years to really determine how might you want to run a legislature. Like when the founders created the country, they didn't figure out all those rules. We've been making them up over time, and what we've made up totally doesn't work. So now they're going to say, what could we make up that might make the legislative machinery super productive and effective? And then Congress can choose to adopt them. And by that time, some people will be elected knowing that they're accountable to a majority of November election voters and knowing that they'll always have real competition. And so they will likely want to have different rules.
So interesting. I have a couple of follow-up questions on this one, Catherine. Mm-hmm. I'm with you on the final five. On the zero-based, if the origins of it are the private sector with zero-based budgeting, I think one of the advantages in the private sector is you do have strong leadership, and it is not a democracy, in a company. And even companies that are very consensus driven struggle sometimes with endless debates and negotiations and committees and this and that. And I'm just trying to imagine those 435 members of Congress trying to get together, agree on like how to run this complex organization. And I mean, especially with the talent that's in there now, I'm not super optimistic that they will come up with something. And so the norms that have been established over the last several decades, while clearly complicated and probably imperfect, at least they give these people something to get something done from time to time. How do you see this like playing out? Because I get the elegance of saying, hey, let's start from scratch. I mean, they can't even keep the government running.
So mea culpa. I have not been clear. The Legislative Machinery Innovation Commission is the group of people that uses zero-based rulemaking to say wipe the slate, and have a blank slate as to how a legislature should run. And then they figure out a whole set of rules, practices, processes, norms that a problem-solving focused Congress would run under.
I see.
And then the legislators adopt that, like they adopt this set of new fantastic rules instead of the current set,
I
of
see.
historical crazy rules.
Interesting.
So
Okay.
you definitely have rules. You're going to have practices and processes and guidelines, and there is no one right way to have people solve problems. But for sure, the way they do it now is 100% the wrong way, like the worst way, as in, let's not vote on the thing if one person doesn't feel like it.
Yeah. Okay. So I mean, we don't need to wait for Congress to do anything. Like, we could set up that think tank and get that bipartisan group of folks from, whatever, the Kennedy School and McKinsey or whatever, that, a whole group of people involved.
And including lots of legislators, in particular, former legislators. I want to read you a quote from Mike Gallagher, who was a rising star in the Republican Party, someone who's actually wrote the foreword for my book on Final Five voting, but he recently left Congress in part out of frustration that they just they can't get anything done. But he said, I quote from him in my book, "Until we fix the processes and the structures of power within Congress, we should expect more of the same: polarization, vitriol, and demagoguery. Every 2 years, candidates will inveigh against the status quo in the swamp and then promptly get swallowed by it. A great country such as ours deserves a functional legislature, and only structural reforms can deliver it." And he means that to be not just the electoral reforms, but the structural reforms in Congress that would give people freedom to and incent them and make it possible for them to work together, and also for the members to have more power. So that, so we can do it anytime. When I published in 2017 this first work, which I'll encourage your viewers to look at, this thing is called "Why Competition in the Politics Industry is Failing America." And it's on Harvard Business School's website. I talked about that we need to have this Legislative Innovation Commission, and that was in 2017. And I put that kind of at the same level as we need to change, the elections machinery, the legislative machinery. And I had a few other ideas in there, and I thought I had narrowed the things we needed to do. And it turned out that was like way too ambitious. So I finally had to stop talking about legislative machinery, because unless we change elections machinery, we're never going to have anybody who will vote yes for the legislative machinery. But I do think that we've made enough progress on elections machinery that we should get started asking ourselves this question, so that in 5 years, when you have enough people in the House and in the Senate who want to adopt functional rules, best practices of problem-solving type rules, you have, like something to hand them that they can start with. And it's going to be really exciting work. At first, I wanted it to be led by like a consortium of universities. I'm now thinking that it might best be led by a consortium of think tanks who are very opposed to each other on policy, but, want great governance. And then they could run it together fundraise from, people all across the spectrum, and then have people care about policy, but also then, as I said before, have, people who are expert on negotiations, people who are experts on conflict resolution.
Mhm.
All of these things, you should be in there and saying, well, how do you resolve conflict? And how does groupthink matter? And what happens when you have too much power at the top instead of down here? And when do you want that power at the top? And there'll be a lot of debates on this, and a lot of work to be done. But you'd end up with, a commission that brings forward the plan. And we do that all the time, like they did it with Simpson Bowles. And I think they
Mhm.
spent about a year there, and then they had their debt deficit and it went nowhere. But maybe this one, if we change the election incentives, would go somewhere. And so I'm like, now, because I was really a lone voice on Final Five and Final Four voting for a long time, but it has now become a top priority for other organizations, including Unite America, including Americans Together, which is Joe Manchin's new organization. There are other people really pushing that and doing a great job. So I'm hopeful to begin recruiting people to think about this zero-based rulemaking commission. And I'm so excited about it. I mean, you can't just have the top level of your business work great and have your day-to-day processes be totally screwed up.
Mhm.
And this,
Oh.
despite its problems, is still working great. And America is extraordinary. And if we pair that with good incentives out of elections, and then rational ways of working together, instead of forbidding consensus, forbidding negotiation, which our current rules do, supporting it, that could be pretty good.
Yeah, I love it. I wonder, just as maybe as an observation from a kind of third party's perspective on this. I wonder if zero based rulemaking is the right characterization of what you're going for, because what I'm hearing is, hey, once we get the incentives in place for how people get elected, we have to make it so that they can do a good job and be effective. And that could be kind of clearing the decks on like how that body operates and makes decisions and negotiates and all that kind of thing. And it could be because I'm familiar with zero based budgeting, which is a very specific approach to like annual planning. And I wonder, like, I think you're talking about more than, okay, yeah, we start with zero and, assume there are no programs. I think you're talking about fundamentally changing how those 435 people make decisions together, which could be about programs, but about all
But
kinds of
again,
things, right?
it's not zero-based budgeting. It's zero-based
Rule
rulemaking.
making. I see.
We're not zero-based budgeting anything.
Yeah,
This
yeah,
has
yeah,
nothing to do with money,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
although it will likely have something to do with how Congress should be funded and how much staff there should be and what sort of members, what kind of support these 535 people need to actually know what they're doing. You know, it will definitely have to do with that over
Yeah.
time. But no, it's not about budgeting.
Got it.
So the zero-based is just meaning
Start
imagine
fresh.
from scratch
Yes, yes,
the
yes, yes.
best things you can think of if you
Uh-huh.
were not constrained by anything except the 6, small paragraphs in here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Love it.
I really got to get better at my explanation. I'm going to do better next time. It's just I haven't talked about this and
No,
since like
this is great.
2018. So thank you.
This is great. And I have a suggestion for if you could get Obama and Romney involved and maybe they can work together. Romney has a little consulting background too. So, and then Obama has been around.
So actually, I don't know if you know this, but so Romney did a blurb, my book up
Oh,
here.
nice.
I actually just saw President Obama, I don't know, 2 weeks ago or something, and I think I gave him my book for like maybe the 5th time I've given it. I don't know. I just like handing it out. But in any case, I think that I'd love to have all these very powerful people speak out about how the existing system is dysfunctional, both in the elections and the legislative machinery. Because if you go back to my example, it is kind of amazing that even President Obama wasn't saying to the people like loud, by the way, if Boehner would let them vote, it would be solved. And it's the same. I mean, by the way, Republicans, Democrats, equally guilty. Like we actually act like this is okay. Like that it's normal that one unelected person can do this to the country because no one even knows. I made this presentation once where I was still talking about legislative machinery to, it was in 2018. I made it to a very influential group, including one very high up Obama, administrative official who served for 8 years and came up to me after and said, does Nancy Pelosi use the Hastert rule? She'd never heard of it. Like that, it was, even though they confronted it all the time, it's like that boy who says the emperor has no clothes. Like that's what we need to be saying about these legislative rules. These are horrific. They just appropriated power that nobody should have, and yet it's been hidden to everybody. And so that is the first thing, that we need to make people aware of. And then I think that that having the elected officials engaged in how we should change it, would make a huge difference. But yes, love to have Senator Romney and President Obama and President Bush and President Trump and President Biden all say that Final Five voting and new legislative machinery would give them a functional Congress to work with.
Well, from your lips to God's ears, we'll hope for the best. I think you're starting in the right order of operations. We have to change the incentives for how people get into that body, and then we can help that body operate more effectively. Thank you so much, Katherine.
Oh, let me say one other. It's almost like we need the nerds for legislative machinery. like literally, we need expertise in legislative machinery. We need to figure it out. So,
are you going to put on a conference or symposium or something like that? Like that sounds like people would be interested in it.
There's so much to do. I am so crazy busy, and I'm so excited again that other organizations have really decided to prioritize Final Five and Final Four voting, because before everybody was just prioritizing RCV on its own, which doesn't, I was opposed to that after a while, and so now that they're doing that, I mean, I'm so excited to be able to think forward a little bit, but I probably won't be putting one on, but I do hope to get some serious institutions in 2025 to come together on this project. And then you will have been the inaugural, sort of public launch of it, since I stopped talking about it after 2018, probably. And now I'm going to do a way better job. So thank you to your listeners who listened to me not be clear enough throughout this podcast.
People have been loving you in the live chat. They've been saying how impressed they were, and that you're a great guest to have.
But now I'm gonna do better next time, and
would like
to keep you informed, and that's thanks to all of you guys that I'll do better next time. Appreciate it.
Yeah, well, let's get you back on at a minimum, like after the election, because then people will have a little more headspace to talk about, how we actually get things done.
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah, and could I do one more thing?
Of course.
Because my publisher begs me to do this now. Okay. Actually, I'm begging myself to do this. This is my book. It's The Politics Industry. I feel no shame because all the author proceeds from this book go to the nonprofit that does this work. lots of information here on legislative machinery and Final Five voting. It would be wonderful if any of your listeners, viewers would take a look at this book and share it with people. I'm quite thrilled because just this week, Reid Hoffman, probably someone well known to your nerds, recommended this book and offered it to a gift to many of his friends. And so that was really fantastic. And he's been a public supporter of this Final Five work as well, as have other people, by the way. Bipartisan support.
Yeah, and I have read it and enjoyed it, so I will also recommend to all the viewers out there, check it out. It's co-written with Michael Porter, who is one of like the great minds of the century or on business. So Katherine, you're in good company on creating that book, and it does break down kind of the old rule, like show me the incentives and I'll show you the outcomes applied to our government. And I'm glad that you're out there putting in the time. And I know you were kind of a lone voice early on, but congrats on all the traction and momentum that I think we're seeing all around.
Yeah, and Andrew Yang did a good TED Talk on Final Five, Final Four voting.
Yes.
I went on his podcast, I think, thanks to you.
I think it's
how I got on his podcast. And then I was the first person who told him about this new way of voting. And it's now one of his very top priorities of life.
Yeah. And he's a great, he puts the word out and he's a great storyteller. And I noticed a lot of the things in his TED Talk were things that I saw in your book as well. So I think there's some good symbiosis there. Yeah.
Oh, he's clear that it all came from me. He says that in his foreword. And he actually, he's totally clear. And he said it even in the TED Talk. Yeah, when he was going to go forward, he called me up and he said, Katherine, you've changed my life. Like, this is the most important thing. And now it's going to be my top priority. He's never, it came from this.
I love it. Yeah. And so if anybody liked Andrew's TED Talk, you can read kind of like the original edition in the politics. What's the exact title again?
The Politics Industry.
The Politics Industry.
And this is, what Andrew was referring to when he referenced it in his TED Talk.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah.
Well, keep up the great work, Katherine, and we'll have to have you back in the Nerd Zone soon. Really appreciate you spending time with us.
Fantastic that you've built such an amazing audience and kept it going.
Take care, Katherine.
Bye.
See you next time. Bye.
See you next time.
All right. Katherine Gehl. I have read that book. It is a great book. And I think a lot of Andrew's advocacy is inspired by what's in that book. So check it out. Oh, Aries 106 is looking into the book. Yes. And Lou, I have purchased. Yes. The audiobook. Love it. Yeah. So I think a lot of us have read it. And it does give you some optimism that, like, okay, if we can change the incentives, we could probably have a little bit less craziness and a little bit more kind of results from our representatives. So, Katherine was saying, hey, thanks for keeping this show going. And, it's great that this audience exists. I need to call out why this audience exists. Part of it is because of our channel members. And these members, some of them have been supporting Nerds for Humanity for over 5 years. It's incredible. So I do want to give them a little bit of a shout out. And then I think what I'll do is give you my predictions for tonight's presidential debate, which is actually, if you're watching this live, 2.5 hours from now. Ooh, get that popcorn ready. But before I do that and share my thoughts on what I think is going to happen, let me give a shout out to our channel members. And if you want, you can join anytime. Just go to YouTube, click the join link on the Nerds for Humanity channel. Just like Soldier One did, who is our senior vice president, has been supporting content like this for over 50 months. The next level down is our vice presidents, Kristen Slevin and Bike Bike. Kristen's one of our oldest members, 53 months of support. Then we've got our hardcore, Gene, David, DK, Jackalego, Mr. History, Mona, Vaughn, Yang, Dean, Galessa, Jay Perrin, Dana, Jason, Daniel, Mickey Yoda, Jackson, Unkiu. And if you're in the live chat right now and you're a member, say hi. I want to give you an extra shout out. And here are verified nerds in order of membership on the channel. Thank you to all of you nerds. All right. And that just starts at $1.99 a month. And you can cancel anytime. So there you go. All right. Now let's see here. Predictions. Soldier 1 was in the live chat. And so yeah, that's awesome. Wait, so was Yoda Fanny, and so was Vaughn. Love it. All right. So now, here's what I'm predicting for tonight. Okay, before I talk about what I predict will happen, let me tell you what I wish will happen, which unfortunately may not happen, but I will wish. I wish, yes, Aries, good point. For those who can't become members, thank you to the members who are helping. And if you're not a member, but you want to help, but you can't, shell out the $1.99, next best thing you can do is smash the like button, share it with your friends and connections on social media, and comment in the comments below. Okay, here's what I wish will happen. I wish that Biden has such a difficult time that it gives him an opportunity to bow out. And we swap out Biden with Gretchen Whitmer, and we run, the Democratic Party runs a Whitmer-Harris ticket. Cannot change Harris, even though she's not the most amazing candidate. I think we should leave her as VP. She's done a decent job, but she shouldn't be the presidential nominee. But I think Whitmer gives us Michigan. She's the governor of Michigan. Secondly, it would be a historic 2 women ticket. Big deal. Third, Trump would be the old guy. Because they wouldn't be able to say, oh, Biden's so old. It's like, no, actually, it's Whitmer Harris versus Trump. And who do we think? Probably Burgum. And Burgum's no spring chicken either, actually. So that's what I wish will happen. I don't think that will happen. So what I think is most likely to happen is Biden will largely ignore Trump and focus on appearing lucid and empathetic to the challenges facing Americans around inflation. I think he will talk about some recent changes he's made around immigration. Probably will try and find some middle ground on Israel and Russia / Gaza, Ukraine. And basically that'll be Biden. He'll just avoid a big flub. And I think Trump will also bring out his New York Democrat roots, which, I mean, he is a Manhattan Democrat. So I think a businessman, so I think he'll bring his all-in pod kind of persona 80% of the time, but he'll throw a few jabs 20% of the time to try and get Biden off balance, mostly around, I think you'll see Trump most aggressive on inflation, immigration, and maybe Hunter. Maybe Hunter will be his thing to kind of see if he can get under Biden's skin. And most likely, it may not be a game changer. Biden will probably not have a disastrous night, and Trump will not come across as a complete madman, and will still be with these 2 options tomorrow. But one can dream about Biden having a change of heart as a result of tonight. I doubt it, but man, wouldn't that be awesome? So that's the most likely scenario. Biden will not have a big, dramatic stumble, but he won't kill it. But since expectations are low, it'll be kind of like State of the Union minus. And then Trump, will probably be the biggest winner, to the extent that people will be surprised how reasonable he can be and how he won't bring like MAGA rally Trump. He's going to be more all-in pod, businessman, apprentice, host kind of Trump. And I think that will help with some independence, and his hardcore supporters won't care because they're going to be behind him no matter what. So those are my predictions. I'm curious to hear what you all think is going to happen. Do you think that one of them is going to have an amazing night, or one of them will totally like have a senior moment? I don't think so. I think they're going to be pretty good about just taking their time, not coming across too crazy or too forgetful, and it'll be what it is. But I think there's that 10% chance we'll see some fireworks, and I think it'll be worth the popcorn. And if it becomes a Whitmer Harris ticket, I would probably feel way better, but we'll see. All right, nerds, with that, I'm going to say, I forgot my going away music. I always forget the going away music. All right, here we go. All right, nerds. So thank you so much for joining the show. Here are my top 3 takeaways from my conversation with Katherine Gehl about the politics industry and the need for reform. Okay, first of all, number 1 is I think she feels pretty good about the progress that Final 5 voting processes are having across the country. I think she also made a point to emphasize that RCV alone is not the solution, that you need to combine it with open primaries and then a Final 5 instant runoff in November. I think secondly, it looks like she's ready to kind of start the second leg of her journey, advocating for kind of legislation 2.0, like a complete reimagination of how Congress works, led by some blue ribbon bipartisan commission. I think that would be super cool. And I think third is we've got a big debate tonight. We didn't talk about that with Kristen, but keep calling her Kristen. Katherine Gehl. We have a big debate tonight, and I'm going to predict neither of them will be big winners and neither of them will be big losers, but it'll be entertaining regardless. If this live stream was useful to you, click that join button on YouTube. And if you can't click the join button, wherever you're watching it, just smash the like or repost or share, and we'll be good. Bye, nerds.